The taser's electric current tore through Lieutenant Commander Damon Park's body. As his wheelchair jerked forward, his muscles seizing violently, Officer Nolan Ramsey stood over him in the VA hospital parking lot, the yellow cartridge still smoking in his hand. "That's what happens when you don't follow orders, boy," Ramsey sneered. His partner, Officer Kevin Jones, gave a nervous laugh behind him. Ranger, Damon's loyal German Shepherd service dog, barked wildly, torn between training and instinct, between discipline and the urge to protect his handler. The two officers had no idea who they were dealing with. To them, he was just another black man in a wheelchair. What they couldn't know was that Lieutenant Commander Damon Park was one of the most elite officers in the United States Navy, and less than 20 meters away, his SEAL team was preparing for a morning training exercise. This story might move you. It might even stay with you. If you believe in the power of truth told through real stories, make sure to subscribe before we begin, because stories like this should never be forgotten. The morning had started quietly for Damon. He'd arrived at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center at exactly 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes early, for his appointment with Dr. Aisha Navarro. The September sun was soft that morning, casting golden streaks across the asphalt. Damon adjusted the collar of his navy blue uniform, the ribbons on his chest glinting in the light, the bronze star, the purple heart, and the Navy Cross. Each medal carried its own story of sacrifice and blood, earned in corners of the world most Americans would never see. Ranger walked obediently beside the wheelchair, his vest marking him as a service animal. The German Shepherd had been paired with Damon 2 years earlier, after the IED explosion in Afghanistan that took his legs, but not his spirit. The war had left him scarred, but not broken. As he rolled toward the medical center's entrance, his phone buzzed. A text from Lieutenant Ryan Cole, one of his SEAL team members, training exercise at 1100. New recruits need to see what real leadership looks like. Damon smiled faintly and typed back, "On my way after the doc, Lieutenant. Keep the rookies in line." He had accepted that leading SEAL Team 7 from behind a desk wasn't the same as the front lines. But leadership was leadership, even from a wheelchair. He still served. The automatic doors opened with a soft hum, letting him into the familiar, sterile lobby. He knew this place well. The VA had become his second home, a place where he worked with Dr. Navarro to manage the constant pain caused by the shrapnel still lodged near his spine. Surgery, they said, was too risky, so he lived with it, just like he'd learned to live with everything else the war had taken from him. Commander Park called a warm voice. Margaret Torres, the head nurse, waved from behind the reception desk. "Dr. Navarro's running about 10 minutes behind. Mondays, you know how they are." "No problem, Margaret," Damon said with a polite nod. "Ranger and I will wait outside. Too nice a day to waste indoors." He'd always preferred the outdoors. Even before the Navy, growing up in Oakland, he'd spent countless hours in city parks dreaming of adventure, of purpose, of something bigger than himself. The Navy had given him all of that, and even now, confined to a wheelchair, the open air still gave him peace. He wheeled himself back outside, parking in a shaded area near the main entrance. Ranger settled beside him, alert but calm. Damon opened his tablet and began reviewing intelligence briefs, routine updates. That still required his oversight. He wasn't leaping from helicopters anymore, but his mind remained one of the Navy's most valuable weapons. The parking lot was quiet. A few elderly veterans shuffled toward the doors, some using walkers, others leaning on canes. Damon nodded respectfully at each of them. There was a silent bond between them, people who had given pieces of themselves to something greater. At 9:15 a.m., a police cruiser rolled into the lot, moving slowly between rows of parked cars. Damon looked up briefly, then returned to his screen. Police cars weren't unusual here. The VA often required patrols for security or medical emergencies. But when the cruiser stopped right behind his truck and both officers stepped out, hands resting on their belts, Damon's instincts told him something was off. The older one, Ramsey, had the hard, cold stare of a man who enjoyed authority too much. His hair was trimmed into a rigid crew cut, his expression sharp and distrustful. The younger one, Jones looked less sure of himself but mimicked his partner's every move. "Excuse me," Ramsey called out, his voice thick with entitlement. "We got a call about someone loitering in this parking lot." "Loitering?" Damon frowned. "I'm waiting for my medical appointment, scheduled for 9. Ramsey walked closer, hand never leaving his taser. "You got some ID to prove that?" Damon's military discipline held. Of course. He moved slowly, aware of how quickly situations could escalate around nervous cops. He pulled out his wallet and handed over his Navy ID and appointment card. "Lieutenant Commander Damon Park, here for Dr. Navarro." Ramsey barely glanced at the cards before smirking. "Military ID, huh? What are you, some kind of stolen valor case? Lot of that going around lately." The accusation hit Damon like a slap. Stolen valor, the worst insult to any real soldier. He stared at the man evenly. "My record is real. I'm currently assigned to Naval Special Warfare Command. You're welcome to verify that." Jones laughed loudly. "Special warfare? Like SEALs?" "Yeah, right. And I'm Superman." Ramsey snorted. "SEALs are supposed to be in peak shape. Doesn't exactly fit the wheelchair profile, does it?" The words cut deep, but Damon kept his tone measured. "My disability was caused by an IED in Afghanistan. I'd appreciate it if you let me wait for my appointment in peace." "That's not how this works," Ramsey said, circling the wheelchair. "We got a complaint about a suspicious individual. Until we're satisfied you're not a threat, you're gonna cooperate." "A threat?" Damon's voice rose slightly. "I'm a disabled veteran on VA property. How exactly am I threatening anyone?" "Attitude, for starters," Jones muttered. "Guy's got a chip on his shoulder. Maybe we should call for backup." Ranger shifted closer to Damon's side, reading his handler's rising tension. The subtle movement caught Ramsey's eye. "Now the dog's getting aggressive," Ramsey snapped, pulling his taser free. "Sir, control your animal or we'll have a problem." "Ranger is a trained service dog," Damon said firmly. "He's reacting to your aggression. If you'd step back and let me wait." "Did you just say we're being aggressive?" Ramsey barked. "Watch your tone, boy." That word "boy" hung in the air like poison. Damon had been called many things, commander, sir, hero, but boy carried the weight of centuries of contempt. He straightened in his chair, eyes locked on Ramsey. "Officer, I am a commissioned officer in the United States Navy. I have served 3 combat tours and currently command a special operations unit. You will not speak to me that way." "Oh, I won't." Ramsey sneered. "You think those medals make you special? Right now, you're just another loudmouth refusing to follow orders." He raised his taser. Damon's training screamed at him to stay calm, to analyze, to survive. "Officer," he said evenly, "you have no probable cause. This is harassment." "Harassment?" Jones barked. "We're doing our jobs. You're the one making this hard." Damon's pulse quickened. He'd seen combat, stared death in the face, but this felt different. Wrong. These men weren't enemies on a battlefield. They were supposed to protect citizens like him. "I'm reaching for my phone," Damon said carefully. "I'll call my commanding officer to verify my identity." "Don't you move," Ramsey shouted, leveling the taser directly at his chest. "Hands where we can see them now." Ranger barked, his leash trembling with restrained fury. Damon froze. "I'm not resisting," he said quietly. "I'm not a threat." "Shut up," Ramsey growled, his finger tightening on the trigger. "You want to play tough guy? Let's see how tough you are." The taser cracked. 50,000 volts surged through Damon's body. His back arched, muscles seizing as the world flashed white. The pain was unimaginable, worse than the explosion that took his legs. "That's what happens when you don't follow orders, boy," Ramsey sneered again. Jones laughed nervously. Ranger barked desperately, circling his handler, torn between instinct and obedience. As the current faded, Damon gasped for air, his vision swimming. His medals glinted faintly in the sun. Through the haze of pain, one thought cut through crystal clear: these men had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Inside the VA Medical Center, Dr. Aisha Navarro was reviewing patient files when a sharp sound split the morning calm. A loud crack, followed by frantic barking. Her head snapped toward the window. Through the glass, she saw a man slumped forward in a wheelchair. 2 uniformed officers standing over him, one holding a smoking taser. Her stomach turned to ice. "Security!" she shouted, sprinting for the door. "We have an emergency in the parking lot." Margaret Torres, the head nurse, rushed beside her. "What happened?" "Someone's been attacked," Dr. Navarro said, pushing through the automatic doors. When they reached the lot, she stopped dead. The man in the wheelchair was wearing a Navy uniform. Recognition hit her like a punch. "That's Commander Park." Damon was still trembling, his breathing ragged. Ranger barked, circling in distress as the two police officers stood back, looking satisfied. "Excuse me," Dr. Navarro shouted, running up to them. "I'm Dr. Aisha Navarro. This man is my patient. What on earth are you doing?" Ramsey turned toward her, his expression hard. "Ma'am, step back. This is police business. We're conducting an investigation." "Investigation?" she repeated, her voice rising. "What kind of investigation involves tasering a disabled veteran in a wheelchair?" This individual was loitering and became aggressive when we asked him to move along, Jones said quickly, his voice trembling just enough to betray guilt. Dr. Navarro crouched beside Damon's chair, her medical instincts taking over. "Commander, can you hear me?" "I'm all right, Doc," he said, his voice weak but steady. "They just gave me a shock, that's all." She looked up at the officers, fury burning behind her calm tone. "This man is a highly decorated Navy SEAL. He's my patient. He's here for a scheduled appointment, not a threat to anyone." Jones blinked, uncertain. Ramsey's jaw tightened. "Well, he should have cooperated. We wouldn't have had to use force if he'd just followed orders." "Followed orders?" Dr. Navarro snapped. "He showed you his ID, didn't he?" "He had some kind of card," Ramsey said dismissively. "Some kind of card?" Her voice rose again. "That card is a military identification belonging to one of the most decorated officers in Naval Special Warfare Command. You just attacked a war hero on federal property." Ramsey's face twitched, a hint of uncertainty breaking through the arrogance. Dr. Navarro straightened, pulling out her phone. "I'm documenting this. Officer, please state your names and badge numbers." "You can't record us without permission," Jones protested. "Actually, I can," she said coldly. "This is a medical emergency on federal property, and I have every right to document it. Now names and badge numbers." Behind her, Margaret had already called VA security. Within minutes, Chief Robert Martinez arrived with two federal security officers. He took one look at the scene, unconscious veteran, a taser still in an officer's hand, and his expression hardened. "Officers," he said firmly, "you're on federal property. I need to know why you're here." "We received a call about a suspicious individual," Ramsey said. "We were following up." "Suspicious individual," Martinez repeated. "At a veterans hospital?" "Look, we didn't know who he was," Ramsey said defensively. "For all we knew, he could have been faking it." Martinez stepped closer, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This man is Lieutenant Commander Damon Park, U.S. Navy SEAL, Bronze Star, Purple Heart. You just tasered a decorated veteran on VA grounds. You had no jurisdiction here, none." Jones swallowed hard, the blood draining from his face. "Sir, we didn't know. You should have asked before using force," Martinez interrupted sharply. "You've violated federal law. I'm contacting the FBI field office immediately." Dr. Navarro placed a gentle hand on Damon's shoulder. "Try to breathe slowly, Commander. You're safe now." He managed a faint nod. "Doc, call Admiral Blake," he said hoarsely. "She needs to know what happened." Dr. Navarro handed him his phone, and Damon dialed the number from muscle memory. "Admiral Blake," came the commanding voice on the other end. "Ma'am, this is Commander Park," he said, his voice low but controlled. "I've encountered a situation at the VA Medical Center. Two local officers just tasered me in the parking lot." There was a long silence. When the Admiral spoke again, her tone was icy. "Say that again, Commander." "Yes, ma'am. Local police. On VA property. No cause, no warning. Understood," Admiral Blake said, her voice now sharp as steel. "Document everything. Every witness, every detail. I'll make the necessary calls." Ramsey overheard part of the call and frowned. "Who's he talking to?" "His commanding officer," Dr. Navarro said evenly. "Admiral Victoria Blake. She's one of the highest-ranking officers in the U.S. Navy. I suggest you start thinking about lawyers." Ramsey's mouth opened, but no words came. Moments later, Martinez's radio crackled. "Chief, FBI agents are en route. ETA 20 minutes. "Copy that," Martinez replied. He turned to Ramsey and Jones. "Gentlemen, you'll stay right here. Do not leave federal property until agents arrive." Damon sat straighter now, the strength slowly returning to his voice. "Chief, I appreciate your quick response, but this needs to go higher than the local level." "It will, Commander," Martinez promised. "I'm forwarding all surveillance footage to the Bureau." Dr. Navarro crossed her arms, still shaking with anger. "They tasered him while he was sitting quietly. It's all on camera." Ramsey's shoulders stiffened. "We didn't mean any harm. We were just doing our job." "Your job," Dr. Navarro said sharply, "is to protect the public, not assault war heroes." Jones finally broke his silence. "Ma'am, we honestly didn't know who he was. He said he was military, but anyone can fake an ID these days." "And your solution," Martinez said, "was to shoot him with a taser instead of verifying his identity? That's not police work, that's abuse of power." He turned toward one of his officers. "Secure the area and pull every second of video. I want this entire incident documented and sent to the FBI before the city even thinks about touching it." The younger officer nodded and hurried off. Damon's phone buzzed again. Admiral Blake had wasted no time. "Commander," she said, "the Joint Chiefs have been briefed. You'll have full Navy support. No one lays a hand on our officers without consequences." "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. Dr. Navarro smiled faintly. "Help's on the way, Commander." "Help's already here, Doc," Damon replied, glancing at the security chief. "These men just started a fight they can't win." By the time the FBI vehicles rolled into the parking lot, word had already spread through the hospital. Veterans and staff gathered near the windows, watching as two local officers, who had come to flex their authority, were suddenly surrounded by federal agents. Agent Sarah Williams, a tall woman with calm authority, stepped out of her car and approached Chief Martinez. "We've been briefed. Is the victim safe?" "Stable," Martinez said, gesturing to Damon. "He's a Navy SEAL commander. The assault happened on federal property, and we've got the whole thing on video." "Good," she said. "We'll take it from here." Ramsey tried to salvage his pride. "We were responding to a complaint. Save it for your statement." Agent Williams cut him off. "You're being placed on administrative hold pending federal review. Do not leave town." Jones swallowed hard. Are we being charged?" "Not yet," she said, "but I'd start preparing." Dr. Navarro guided Damon back toward the medical center for a full checkup. Ranger walked close beside him, tail low, ears alert. Inside, the corridors fell silent as people moved aside for the wounded commander. Margaret met them at the door, her face pale. "Commander Park, I saw the footage. They just did it." "I'm fine, Margaret," Damon said softly. "But this isn't over." Inside the exam room, Dr. Navarro began running tests. "Your vitals are steady," she said, "but tasers can cause delayed effects. We'll monitor you for a few hours." Damon's jaw clenched. "They didn't just attack me, Doc. They attacked what I represent. Every veteran who's ever come home and been treated like they don't matter." She met his eyes. "Then make them listen, Commander. Make them see." Outside, the flashing blue and red lights reflected off the hospital's glass entrance, painting the walls in chaos. The two officers sat on the curb, silent, as FBI agents reviewed the footage on a tablet nearby. Every second was recorded. Damon's calm voice, their taunts, the trigger pull. It was all there. Chief Martinez watched quietly. "Gentlemen," he said finally, "I hope you understand what you've done. You didn't just taser a man in a wheelchair. You tasered the wrong man." By late morning, the VA Medical Center had turned into the center of a federal storm. The parking lot buzzed with agents, security officers, and cameras being set up by news crews who had already caught wind of something serious. Inside, Commander Damon Park sat upright on the hospital bed, his muscles still sore but his mind sharper than ever. His phone vibrated again. It was Admiral Victoria Blake. "Commander," she said, her voice steady but edged with controlled fury. I've been briefed by the Joint Chiefs. You're to cooperate fully with the FBI. The Secretary of Defense has already been notified." "Yes, ma'am," Damon replied. "Agent Williams is here. They have the footage and witness statements." "Good, and Damon." She paused. "We will not let this be buried under small-town politics. You've bled for this country, and no one will treat you like that and walk away." "Understood, Admiral," he said softly. She hung up, and Damon felt a strange calm settle over him. In combat, clarity often came in the middle of chaos, and this, somehow, felt no different. Outside the exam room, Dr. Navarro was speaking with Agent Williams and Chief Martinez. "He's stable," she told them, "but what those officers did was unconscionable. I've treated veterans for years, but I've never seen something like this on federal grounds." Agent Williams nodded. "It's worse than you think. We're getting calls from Washington already. The Pentagon, DOJ, even the White House wants updates." "Good," Martinez said firmly. "They should. What happened out there is a disgrace." Agent Williams stepped into Damon's room. "Commander Park," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Special Agent Sarah Williams, FBI Civil Rights Division. I'm here to make sure this is handled correctly." Damon shook her hand, his grip firm despite the pain. "Appreciate it, Agent Williams. I've been in firefights that made more sense than this." She smiled faintly. "I believe it. I just reviewed the footage. It's clear as day. You were calm, compliant, respectful. They escalated without cause. We'll be recommending federal charges for deprivation of rights under color of law." Damon nodded. They picked the wrong veteran. Meanwhile, just 20 minutes away, at the Naval Special Warfare Command Base, Lieutenant Ryan Cole was pacing the training hangar. He'd tried calling his commander twice, no answer. Finally, his phone rang. It was Petty Officer Williams from Admiral Blake's office. "Lieutenant Cole," the voice said, "the Admiral asked me to update you. Commander Park was involved in an incident at the VA Medical Center. He's safe, but there's been an assault." "Assault?" Cole repeated, his stomach dropping. "What kind of assault?" "Local police used a taser on him. On federal property. The FBI's already involved." Cole's knuckles whitened around the phone. "You're telling me someone tasered a Navy SEAL commander in uniform?" "Yes, sir." He closed his eyes, anger rising like heat under his collar. "Tell the Admiral SEAL Team 7 stands ready to assist. We take care of our own." "I'll pass that along, Lieutenant." Cole ended the call and turned toward his men, who were gathered near the training bay. Their conversations stopped instantly when they saw his face. "What's going on, sir?" asked Chief Petty Officer Thompson, the team's senior enlisted man. Cole's voice was grim. "Commander Park was attacked by local cops this morning. They tasered him outside the VA hospital." The room went dead silent. "Is he alive?" Thompson asked quietly. "He's alive. The FBI and Navy are involved. But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." Petty Officer Martinez slammed a fist against the locker. "They attacked him? A war hero? For what?" Cole's tone softened but stayed firm. "He's stable. We're to stand by while the Admiral handles this through proper channels." Rodriguez, the youngest member of the team, spoke up hesitantly. "Sir, if the system fails him, what then?" Cole looked at his men, their faces hardened, eyes burning with loyalty. "Then," he said slowly, "we remind the world who we are. But for now, we wait." At the Pentagon, Admiral Blake stood in her office overlooking the Potomac. Phone pressed to her ear. On the other line was Admiral Morrison, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. "Victoria." Morrison said, his tone grave. "I've read your report. Is it true local police assaulted a Navy SEAL commander on federal property?" "Yes, sir," she replied. "Tasered him while he sat in a wheelchair waiting for a medical appointment. It's all on surveillance." "Unbelievable," Morrison muttered. "What's his condition? Stable?" "But the incident is already going viral among military circles. This will not stay quiet." "Nor should it," Morrison said sharply. "Prepare a full report for the Secretary of Defense. The administration needs to be briefed. This has national implications." "Understood, sir." As the call ended, Admiral Blake leaned back in her chair, her fury cold and focused. She'd commanded warships, negotiated with foreign governments. and lost soldiers under her command, but this was different. The enemy this time wasn't on foreign soil. It was right here, in uniform, hiding behind a badge. Back at the VA, the waiting room was filled with whispers. Veterans were talking quietly, some angry, some heartbroken. "They tasered a SEAL commander," one man said, his hands shaking. "That could have been any of us." Another veteran, missing an arm, nodded. They see a black man in a uniform and still can't see past their prejudice. Dr. Navarro overheard the conversation as she stepped out of Damon's room. "He's safe," she reassured them. "But this has to change. This can't keep happening." Outside, Ramsey and Jones stood by their cruiser, their earlier bravado gone. FBI agents were questioning them one at a time, while VA security officers recorded everything. "I told you this was a bad idea," Jones muttered under his breath. "Shut up," Ramsey hissed. "Stick to the story." He was being aggressive. Aggressive? He was sitting down, Jones snapped. "You pulled the taser before he even raised his voice." Ramsey's glare could have cut glass. "If you want to keep your job, you'll remember it differently." But the truth was already out of their hands. Every second of the encounter was captured by hospital surveillance, and that footage was now in federal custody. Inside the command center of the FBI's Springfield field office, the footage played on a large monitor. Agent Williams stood beside a technician as they analyzed the video frame by frame. "There," she said, pointing. "You can see Commander Park clearly identify himself. He hands over ID, and the officer ignores it. Audio's clean too," the technician confirmed. "No threats, no resistance. Just pure abuse of power." Agent Williams sighed. "They didn't just violate his rights, they violated federal jurisdiction. This is going to explode." Back in the hospital room, Damon's phone buzzed again this time. A message from Lieutenant Cole. "Sir, SEAL Team 7 stands by. Whatever you need." Damon smiled faintly. Even from afar, his team was his family. "Tell the men I'm proud of them," he typed back. "We fight smart. Always." When Dr. Navarro returned with a clipboard, she found him calmer. "You're thinking like a soldier again," she said. "I never stopped," Damon replied. "I just changed battlefields." By early afternoon, VA Security Chief Martinez returned with an update. "Commander, the FBI has taken full control. The city's police department's already in panic mode. Their chief wants a meeting with federal investigators." Damon nodded slowly. "Let them sweat." "And sir," Martinez added, "the footage is already in multiple secure archives. There's no hiding what happened." "Good," Damon said. "They wanted to humiliate me in public. Now the world's going to see what real accountability looks like." Outside, the flashing lights finally began to fade as FBI vehicles departed. But the story was already spreading faster than any of them could contain it. Reporters were calling, veterans groups were organizing, and inside the VAS walls, quiet outrage had turned into a wave of determination. For Officer Ramsey and his partner, it was too late to take anything back. For Commander Damon Park, the reckoning had just begun. By the next morning, the story had broken nationwide. Every major news outlet carried the same shocking headline: "Decorated Navy SEAL Commander Tasered." By local police outside VA hospital, clips of the footage played on repeat. Damon in his wheelchair, calmly handing over his ID, followed by the snap of electricity and his body jerking in pain. The image was impossible to ignore. In Bentonville's police headquarters, chaos reigned. Phones rang non-stop, reporters camped outside, and officers whispered nervously in the hallways. Inside the chief's office, Police Chief Harold Denton stood pale-faced, watching the news coverage. The anchor's voice was cold. Commander Damon Park, a highly decorated Navy SEAL and recipient of the Bronze Star and Navy Cross, was assaulted yesterday morning by two Bentonville police officers. Federal authorities are now investigating. Chief Denton turned away from the screen and glared at the two officers standing before his desk. "Ramsey and Jones, what the hell were you two thinking?" he barked. "Chief, it wasn't like that," Ramsey said, trying to steady his voice. "The guy was acting suspicious. We thought he might be faking it." "Faking it," Denton repeated in disbelief. "He's a double amputee and a decorated SEAL commander. You tasered a national hero on camera. You've just made this entire department a national disgrace." Jones looked ready to cry. "Sir, we didn't know. That's exactly the problem," Denton cut in. "You didn't know, you didn't ask, and now Washington is breathing down my neck. The FBI, the DOJ, even the damn Secretary of Defense wants updates. Do you realize what you've done?" Ramsey's pride cracked under the pressure. "Chief, with all due respect," the guy mouthed off. "We were just maintaining order." Denton's eyes narrowed. "Maintaining order? You attacked a disabled veteran on federal soil. You crossed every line imaginable. You're both suspended pending investigation effective immediately." Ramsey's jaw dropped. "You can't just—" "I can and I am," Denton snapped. "Hand over your badges and your service weapons. The city attorney will contact you. And Ramsey, if I were you, I'd call a lawyer before the feds call you." Ramsey slammed his badge onto the desk. "This is bull. Get out." Denton thundered. The two officers stormed out of the office, their faces pale. The room fell quiet except for the low hum of the television. Denton turned back toward the screen, where a retired Marine was speaking on a morning show. "I served 22 years in the Corps," the man said. "If that officer had done that to any of my men, I'd expect accountability. We ask our soldiers to risk their lives for this country, and this is how they're treated back home?" The audience applauded. Denton sighed and sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. He knew this wasn't just bad press, it was a career-ending disaster. Across town, in a small newsroom, local reporter Nina Walsh prepared for her live broadcast. She'd been covering the Bentonville police for years, but she'd never seen a scandal this explosive. "Cameras rolling in 5, her producer called out. Nina adjusted her microphone. "This is Nina Walsh reporting live from Bentonville Police Headquarters, where 2 officers have been suspended following the shocking taser assault on Commander Damon Park, a decorated U.S. Navy SEAL. The footage has sparked outrage across the nation, with veterans groups calling for justice and federal oversight." Behind her, protesters were already gathering. Some carried signs that read "Justice for Commander Park and Protect Our Veterans." Others held American flags, waving them silently. Back at the VA Medical Center, Damon sat in his hospital room, his wheelchair positioned by the window. He could see the growing crowd of reporters outside the gates. He wasn't looking for attention, but he understood that this moment was no longer just about him. Dr. Navarro entered quietly, holding a folder of test results. "Your vitals are improving," she said with a reassuring smile. "You'll be cleared for discharge this afternoon." "Thanks, Doc," Damon replied. "Any word from Admiral Blake?" "She called earlier," Navarro said. "She wanted me to tell you that the Navy stands behind you. She's briefing Congress this morning." Damon nodded slowly. "She's not one to sit still when injustice shows its face." Navarro hesitated. "The media wants an interview. They're asking for your side of the story." "I told them you're still recovering. I'll speak when the time's right," Damon said. "But not for the cameras, for the truth." Outside, Chief Martinez was coordinating with FBI agents to manage the chaos. "We've got veterans driving in from 3 states over," one of his officers reported. "They're turning the front lawn into a rally site." "Let them," Martinez said. "They've earned the right to stand for one of their own." At noon, a press conference began at the Justice Department. Agent Williams stood beside U.S. Attorney Linda Graves as cameras flashed. "Yesterday morning," Graves began, 2 local police officers assaulted a disabled Navy SEAL commander on federal property. The Department of Justice and the FBI have launched a full investigation. We are treating this as a civil rights violation and an abuse of power under federal law." The room buzzed with reporters shouting questions. "Are the officers under arrest? Will the Navy be pressing charges?" Graves raised her hand. "We're working closely with the Department of Defense and the Navy's legal division. I can assure you, accountability will be absolute." Meanwhile, in a quiet hotel outside Bentonville, Ramsey sat alone at the bar, nursing a whiskey. His phone vibrated with notifications, news headlines, angry emails, even death threats. He turned it over, face down. Jones sat beside him, pale and shaken. "Ramsey, what if they charge us? What if we go to prison?" Ramsey stared at his drink. "They won't. They'll make us scapegoats, take our badges. Maybe a desk job in some backwater department, and call it justice. Jones shook his head. You don't get it, man. This isn't going away. That guy's a national hero. The whole country's watching. Ramsey's jaw clenched. Then let them watch. He didn't say it out loud, but deep down he knew the truth this time. There was no getting out clean. Back at the Pentagon, Admiral Blake walked briskly into a meeting room filled with senior officials. Charts and headlines flashed across a digital wall display. Public outrage, trending hashtags, statements from veterans organizations. Admiral, said Deputy Secretary Foster, this is spreading fast. The administration wants to ensure full transparency. We're coordinating with DOJ. Blake nodded. That's good. Commander Park doesn't want pity. He wants justice. We owe him that. Another official leaned forward. Public sentiment is heavily on his side. The footage is undeniable. This could become a turning point for accountability in law enforcement. Then let's make sure it is, Blake said firmly. This isn't just about one man. It's about every soldier who's been disrespected, every veteran who's been ignored. We can't let this be forgotten after the news cycle moves on. Back in Bentonville, evening descended slowly over the city. The VA parking lot, once a quiet place of healing, had become a sea of flags and signs. Veterans in wheelchairs, Gold Star families, and everyday citizens stood side by side, candles flickering in their hands. Dr. Navarro wheeled Damon outside to the edge of the crowd. The air was cool, filled with the murmur of unity and anger. Someone handed him a microphone, but he didn't speak at first. He just looked out at the faces before him, men and women who understood sacrifice, who'd fought their own invisible battles. Finally, he spoke quietly. I didn't come here today to talk about pain. I came to remind us all that service doesn't end when the uniform comes off. It lives in how we treat each other. Yesterday, 2 men forgot that. But today, all of you standing here remind me why I served in the first place. The crowd cheered, some shouting his name. Damon lowered the microphone, his heart heavy but strong. Somewhere in the crowd, a veteran whispered to another, that's what a real soldier looks like. 2 days after the incident, Washington, D.C. was burning with debate. Every major news network had turned the story of Commander Damon Park into the nation's latest moral flashpoint. Clips of the Taser video had been viewed over 60 million times. Talk shows, newspapers, and political panels all dissected the same haunting image. A man who had given everything for his country, humiliated in broad daylight. At the Capitol, the House Committee on Veterans Affairs called an emergency session. Cameras flashed as Admiral Victoria Blake took the witness seat, her posture firm and composed in full Navy uniform. Admiral Blake, said Congressman David McMillan, the committee chair, you're testifying under oath regarding the incident involving Commander Damon Park. Do you believe this was an isolated case? She met his gaze without hesitation. No, sir. I believe this was the result of systemic bias and a lack of respect for the men and women who have served this nation, especially those of color. Commander Park's experience was not unique. It was simply caught on camera. Her words sent a ripple through the chamber. McMillan leaned forward. Do you have evidence suggesting similar incidents? Yes, sir. Over the past 5 years, we've documented multiple cases where veterans were profiled, harassed, or mistreated by local authorities while seeking care at VA facilities. This one just happened to involve a man who could not be ignored. In the gallery, reporters scribbled furiously. McMillan nodded gravely. Admiral, thank you. The American people needed to hear that. Outside the Capitol, crowds gathered with signs that read justice for Commander Park and respect our veterans. The story had moved beyond Bentonville. It had become a mirror reflecting the country's conscience. Meanwhile, in Bentonville, Ramsey and Jones were officially charged. Federal agents arrived at their homes early that morning. Officers Nolan Ramsey and Kevin Jones, the lead agent, announced, "You're under arrest for violation of federal civil rights statutes, unlawful use of force, and assault on a federal property." Ramsey stood in his doorway, stunned. "You've got to be kidding me. Do you wish to make a statement?" The agent asked calmly. "Yeah," Ramsey spat, glaring at the cameras that had gathered outside. "This is a witch hunt. I was doing my job. That's all." The agents ignored him and cuffed his wrists as Jones stood silently beside his wife, tears welling in his eyes. Hours later, footage of their arrests played on national television. The same networks that had once aired their brutality now broadcast their downfall. Back at the VA Medical Center, Damon watched the broadcast with quiet composure. Dr. Navarro stood beside him. "Justice moves slowly," she said softly, "but it moves." Damon nodded. "It's not just about them anymore. It's about what comes after." Chief Martinez entered with a folder in his hand. "Commander, Agent Williams wanted me to deliver this personally. It's the official report. The FBI's recommending full prosecution. They're also pushing for new guidelines for law enforcement interactions with veterans." Damon opened the folder and scanned the pages. "Good. Maybe next time, someone like me won't have to bleed again just to be believed." Dr. Navarro smiled faintly. "You've started something bigger than any of us." At that moment, his phone buzzed. It was Lieutenant Cole. "Sir," Cole said, his voice filled with pride. "The team's been following the news. You've become an example to every soldier out there." "I didn't ask for that," Damon said quietly. "I know," Cole replied. "That's what makes it real. You didn't fight for fame, you fought for dignity. That's what people respect." "Tell the men I'm proud of them," Damon said. "And tell them the mission isn't over. We fight for the truth now." That night, a televised town hall was held. Veterans, activists, and public officials gathered to discuss reform. The moderator, a respected journalist, turned to Damon via live video feed. "Commander Park, the nation is listening. What message do you have for the people watching tonight?" Damon paused for a long moment before speaking. "I served 20 years believing that courage was found on the battlefield. But now I see courage in every veteran who comes home and still has to fight to be treated with respect. We wear the uniform with pride, but that pride doesn't disappear when the uniform comes off. The real question is, does our country honor that same pride?" The audience applauded, some standing to their feet. Across the nation, living rooms fell silent. His words weren't fiery or loud, but they carried the weight of truth. In the days that followed, Congress began drafting what the media soon called the Park Act, a proposed federal bill that would require additional training for law enforcement on handling veterans, particularly those with disabilities or PTSD. Admiral Blake testified again in support of it, standing beside senators and advocacy groups. "If this legislation saves even one life or prevents one act of injustice," she said, "then Commander Park's pain will not have been in vain." Meanwhile, in a quiet cell at the county jail, Ramsey sat alone. The arrogance that once filled him had drained away. For the first time in years, he had no control. The silence was suffocating. Jones, in the adjacent cell, stared at the wall. "You think they'll really send us to prison?" he asked softly. Ramsey didn't answer. Deep down, he knew the truth, the video, the witnesses, the federal heat. There was no escaping this. At the VA, Damon was preparing for discharge. Reporters gathered outside again, but he avoided the cameras. Chief Martinez walked him out the back entrance, where only a few staff members stood waiting. Dr. Navarro met him at the curb. "Take it easy, Commander," she said. "The world's watching you now." He gave her a small smile. "Then let's give them something worth watching." He paused beside his truck, resting a hand on Ranger's head. The loyal German shepherd looked up at him, eyes steady and full of trust. "You ready to go home, buddy?" Damon whispered. Ranger wagged his tail softly, and for the first time since that day, Damon laughed, not a loud laugh, but one that came from deep inside, the kind that meant healing had begun. Back in Washington, Admiral Blake received a message from him that simply read, "Thank you for standing with me, ma'am. Mission still ongoing." She smiled. "It always is," she murmured. By week's end, veterans groups from across the country organized a march on the National Mall. Tens of thousands arrived, soldiers in old uniforms, families carrying portraits of loved ones, civilians holding flags. At the center of it all, standing beneath the Lincoln Memorial, was Commander Damon Park. The air was cool, and the sky glowed orange as the sun dipped low. Cameras flashed, but he barely noticed. He spoke softly, his voice echoing through the still air. "The measure of a nation isn't in how it fights wars. It's in how it treats those who fought them. I didn't ask for fame or pity. I asked for dignity. And that's something every one of us deserves." The crowd erupted in applause. Veterans saluted, tears glistening in their eyes. In that moment, Damon realized something powerful: the pain, the humiliation, the outrage, all of it had become something larger than him. It had become a movement, and though the scars remained, the fight for justice had finally begun to heal something far deeper in the country's soul. The Bentonville Federal Courthouse was overflowing the morning the trial began. Journalists, veterans, and ordinary citizens crowded the steps, holding flags and signs that read "Justice for Commander Park and no one above the law." Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Every seat in the courtroom was filled. On one side sat the prosecution team from the Department of Justice, led by U.S. Attorney Linda Graves. On the other, Officers Nolan Ramsey and Kevin Jones sat in silence beside their defense lawyers. At the center of it all, sitting calm and composed in his wheelchair, was Lieutenant Commander Damon Park. He wore his formal Navy uniform, ribbons neatly aligned across his chest. Ranger lay quietly at his side, eyes alert, sensing the gravity in the air. Judge Harriet Malone entered the courtroom, her gavel echoing like thunder. "Court is now in session." The prosecution began with opening statements. "Ladies and gentlemen," Graves said, her voice measured but firm, "this case is about power and the abuse of it. The defendants didn't just assault a man. They humiliated a war hero on federal soil without reason or restraint. Commander Park represented everything noble about service to this country. They represented everything corrupt about unchecked authority." Ramsey's jaw tightened, his eyes darting briefly toward Damon, the defense attorney. A well-groomed man with slicked-back hair rose to counter. "My clients were responding to a call about a suspicious person. They acted on training, not prejudice. This was a tragic misunderstanding, not a crime." The courtroom murmured softly. Judge Malone silenced them with a sharp tap of the gavel. "We will have order." The first witness called was Dr. Aisha Navarro. She stepped up to the stand, steady and professional. "Dr. Navarro," Graves began, "were you present during the incident?" "Yes," she said. "I saw everything from the hospital entrance." Commander Park was seated in his wheelchair, calm and cooperative. He identified himself as a Navy officer and presented identification. The officers ignored it. And then what happened? They accused him of faking his injuries. When he tried to explain, one of them fired the taser. Without warning, the courtroom gasped softly. "And what did you do?" "I ran to him," Navarro said, her voice trembling slightly. "He was convulsing. His service dog was barking and trying to protect him. It was horrifying. I've seen combat injuries, but this was cruelty." "Thank you, Doctor," Graves said gently. No further questions. The defense attorney rose. "Dr. Navarro, could it be possible that Commander Park's tone escalated the situation?" Her eyes flashed. "You're asking if a man in a wheelchair raised his voice before being electrocuted on federal property?" The attorney hesitated. "I'm just asking if no," she interrupted, her tone cutting. Nothing he said justified what they did. The defense lawyer's shoulders slumped. No further questions. Next came Chief Robert Martinez. He walked to the stand in his VA uniform, his posture straight as a soldier. "Chief," Graves said, "you arrived shortly after the assault?" "Yes, ma'am." "I responded within minutes of the call." "What did you observe?" Commander Park was on the ground, visibly in pain. The officers were standing over him. One still had the taser in his hand. "Did they have authorization to be on federal property?" "No, they did not," Martinez replied. "Local police have no jurisdiction inside VA grounds without coordination. They broke the law the moment they stepped out of their vehicle." The defense lawyer rose for cross-examination. "Chief, you mentioned jurisdiction. Isn't it true the VA occasionally requests local police support?" "Yes," Martinez replied, "but only by formal request. There was none that day, and certainly not for a man sitting in a wheelchair waiting for his appointment." The lawyer pressed on. "Could this have been an honest mistake?" Martinez leaned forward slightly. "There's no honesty in pointing a weapon at a veteran and pulling the trigger." The crowd murmured in agreement. Judge Malone rapped her gavel again. Then came the moment everyone waited for. Commander Damon Park, the bailiff, called. He wheeled forward to the stand. The room fell completely silent. Even Ramsey and Jones looked uneasy as he raised his right hand to be sworn in. "Commander Park," Graves said softly, "thank you for being here. We know this is not easy." He nodded. "I've been through worse, ma'am." A few chuckles broke the tension before he began. "Commander, can you describe what happened that morning?" Damon's voice was calm, deliberate. "I arrived at the VA for a scheduled appointment. I was early. I parked, got out, and waited near the entrance. I was reviewing reports on my tablet when the officers approached. They said they'd received a call about someone loitering. I explained that I was a patient. I showed my ID, but they didn't look. They didn't listen." His gaze shifted toward Ramsey. "They saw a black man in a wheelchair and made a decision before a word left my mouth." The courtroom was so quiet that even Ranger's breathing could be heard. "What happened next?" Graves asked. "They accused me of faking my injuries, said I didn't look like a SEAL. One of them circled behind me. I stayed calm. I told them I was reaching for my phone to call my commanding officer. That's when he fired the taser." Damon paused. The pain was immediate. "My muscles locked. I couldn't breathe. I've been shot at. I've been blown up. But nothing compares to that feeling of being powerless in your own country." His voice cracked just slightly. "I remember thinking, this can't be happening here. Not after everything I've given." Graves's eyes glistened, but she kept her composure. "And after that, Dr. Navarro came running. She stopped them from doing more. I told her to call Admiral Blake. She did." "Thank you, Commander," Graves said quietly. "No further questions." The defense attorney stood up, his voice cautious. "Commander Park, do you believe the officers meant to harm you personally?" Damon looked at him steadily. "Intent doesn't matter when pain is real. Their choices did the harm. That's all that counts." The lawyer nodded, defeated. No further questions. As Damon wheeled back to his place, the courtroom erupted in quiet applause until Judge Malone's gavel restored order. Outside, the crowd of veterans stood with their hands over their hearts as they listened to updates broadcast. T lived from inside. Inside the courtroom, Ramsey's lawyer whispered urgently, "If you take the stand, you'll destroy yourself." But Ramsey, stubborn as ever, refused to stay silent. "I have nothing to hide." When it was his turn, he rose, walked stiffly to the stand, and adjusted his tie. "Officer Ramsey," Graves began, "you've seen the footage. Do you deny firing your taser at Commander Park?" "I don't deny it," Ramsey said sharply. But he was being confrontational. "I felt threatened." "Threatened?" Graves echoed. "By a double amputee in a wheelchair?" Ramsey shifted uncomfortably. "You weren't there." "No," Graves said, "but the cameras were. They saw you taunt him. They saw you call him boy. They saw you pull the trigger without provocation. Explain that to the court." Ramsey's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes darted to his attorney, who lowered his head. "Nothing further," Graves said. By the time the prosecution rested, the case was clear. Every angle, every witness, every second of footage painted the same truth. When closing arguments began, Graves turned toward the jury. "Justice is not about vengeance. It's about truth. And the truth is simple. These officers thought they could get away with treating a hero like a criminal. But they forgot that honor still exists, and it sits right there," she said, gesturing toward Damon, in that chair. The courtroom erupted in emotion. When Judge Malone adjourned for the day, Ramsey sat still, his confidence gone. He knew what was coming. Damon rolled past him quietly, meeting his eyes for just a moment. There was no anger there, only strength. "Commander," Ramsey said softly, almost desperate. "I didn't mean," Damon stopped and said calmly. "You never have to mean hate for it to destroy someone. You just have to ignore your humanity." Then he rolled away, leaving Ramsey staring at the floor. The next morning, the air around the Bentonville Federal Courthouse felt different. The sun was sharp, the crowd outside larger than ever. Veterans stood shoulder to shoulder, flags rippling in the breeze. Reporters lined the barricades, waiting for the verdict that the entire nation was holding its breath for. Inside, the courtroom was silent except for the soft rustle of papers. Judge Malone entered, her face composed but stern. Damon sat near the front with Ranger by his side, the dog's steady breathing the only sound he could focus on. The jury filed in, 12 ordinary Americans now burdened with a decision that had become a symbol of justice itself. Their expressions were unreadable. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Malone asked. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with silver hair, rose to her feet. We have, Your Honor. The clerk took the envelope, handed it to the judge, and the room fell into an almost sacred silence. On the charge of violating civil rights under color of law, Judge Malone read, her voice steady. We find the defendant, Officer Nolan Ramsey, guilty. The words seemed to echo through the room like a thunderclap. Gasps filled the air, followed by muffled cries of relief and applause. Judge Malone continued, on the same charge, Officer Kevin Jones guilty. Jones dropped his head into his hands. Ramsey sat frozen, his face pale, his arrogance finally gone. Judge Malone struck the gavel once. Order, order in the court. The applause subsided, replaced by quiet sobs and deep, emotional silence. Ramsey's lawyer stood weakly. Your Honor, we request leniency. Request denied. The judge interrupted firmly. You assaulted a decorated war hero on federal property. The law demands accountability. Sentencing will follow. When the courtroom adjourned, the doors opened to an ocean of cheers outside. Veterans saluted as Damon was wheeled through the crowd. Flashbulbs popped, microphones reached toward him, but he said nothing. He didn't need to. The look on his face, calm, proud, unbroken, spoke louder than any words. Dr. Navarro walked beside him, her eyes glistening with tears. It's over, Commander. Damon gave a faint smile. No, Doc, it's just beginning. Hours later, back in the courtroom for sentencing, the air felt thick with expectation. Judge Malone took her seat again, papers spread before her. Before I deliver sentencing, I will allow the victim to speak. Damon wheeled forward slowly. The room hushed once more. Ranger followed quietly, his leash loose in Damon's hand. He faced Ramsey and Jones. I spent decades fighting for this country, he said softly. Not for medals, not for glory, but for the belief that justice meant something, that we were all equal under the same flag. He paused, his gaze firm but not hateful. You didn't just attack me that morning. You attacked everything I stood for, every veteran who's ever come home and felt unseen. But I don't hate you. I just pity the part of you that forgot what decency looks like. He turned toward the judge. Your Honor, I don't ask for revenge. I ask for change, so that no one else has to go through what I did. Judge Malone nodded solemnly. Thank you, Commander. Then she turned to the defendants. Officer Ramsey, Officer Jones, stand. The two men rose slowly. You were entrusted with power, she said, her tone sharp as steel. You chose to abuse it. This court sentences you both to 10 years in federal prison, without the possibility of early release. Gasps filled the room. Jones broke down, sobbing openly. Ramsey stood motionless, eyes hollow, the reality sinking in. Take them into custody, Judge Malone ordered. As marshals led them away, Ramsey looked over his shoulder at Damon, who simply nodded once, not in triumph, but in acknowledgement. The moment wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. Outside, the verdict had already reached the world. News anchors spoke of justice finally being served. Veterans posted messages of solidarity. Strangers sent letters to Damon's address, thanking him for his courage. Later that evening, in a quiet hotel room overlooking the city, Damon sat by the window, watching the lights flicker across the skyline. Ranger lay at his feet, tail gently thumping against the carpet. There was a knock at the door. Admiral Victoria Blake stood there in civilian clothes, her expression soft but proud. Permission to come in, Commander, she said. Always, ma'am, Damon replied, smiling. She stepped in and took a seat beside him. For a long moment, they both just sat there in silence, the kind shared only between soldiers who've seen too much and survived it all. You carried yourself with grace, Damon, she said finally. The Navy couldn't be prouder. It wasn't just about me, he said. It was about every name carved on the walls of Arlington, every soldier who deserved respect long before I asked for it. Blake nodded. You've changed more than you know. Congress just passed the preliminary draft of the Park Act. It's moving faster than anyone expected. Damon looked up, surprised. Already? Already, she said. Mandatory veteran sensitivity training for law enforcement nationwide. It's happening because of you. He exhaled slowly. Then maybe it was all worth it. It was, Blake said softly. But don't think for a second that your mission's done. The world still needs men like you. He smiled faintly. Funny, I thought I retired from saving the world. Heroes don't retire, she said, rising to her feet. They just change battlefields. When she left, the room was quiet again. Damon rolled closer to the window, looking out at the stars. The night sky was vast, endless like the sea he once commanded. Ranger lifted his head, watching him quietly. Damon reached down and scratched behind his ear. You and me, buddy, he whispered. We made it. He thought about the journey, the explosion that took his legs, the pain that followed, the humiliation in that parking lot, and now this moment of hard-earned peace. Life had tested him in every possible way, but it hadn't broken him. It had refined him. The next morning, he returned to the VA hospital, not as a patient this time, but as a symbol of change. Veterans lined the halls, shaking his hand, thanking him for standing up for them. Because of you, one young soldier said, I'm not afraid to wear my uniform in public anymore. That simple sentence struck him deeper than any medal ever had. In the courtyard, beneath the flagpole, a small ceremony was held. The Navy and VA unveiled a plaque in his honor. It read, to Lieutenant Commander Damon Park, who reminded a nation that courage has many forms. As the flag was raised, the wind carried the sound of applause across the hospital grounds. Damon looked up at it, the stars and stripes fluttering proudly above him. And for the first time in a long while, he felt peace. Dr. Navarro stood nearby, smiling through tears. You did it, Commander. He turned to her, his eyes reflecting the sunlight. No, he said softly. We did it. The crowd stood silent for a moment, the flag waving strong against the sky. And somewhere deep in his heart, Damon whispered a quiet promise to every veteran, every soldier, every forgotten name that their stories would never be silenced again. Months passed, but the impact of what happened to Commander Damon Park never faded. His name had become more than a story on the news, it had become a movement. Across the nation, police departments began implementing new training programs for handling veterans. The Park Act, once a distant proposal, passed through Congress with overwhelming bipartisan support. It required every law enforcement officer in America to receive mandatory education about military trauma, disability awareness, and respect for those who served. Damon never sought the spotlight, but it found him anyway. Invitations poured in from talk shows, military conferences, universities, but he accepted only a few. He didn't want fame. He wanted purpose. When he finally appeared for a national interview, it wasn't filmed in a studio. It was shot in the same VA courtyard where everything had begun. The interviewer, a calm-voiced woman from a major network, sat opposite him beneath the flagpole. Commander Park, she said softly, you've inspired millions. How does it feel, seeing your name tied to a federal law? Damon looked around at the hospital grounds, the benches, the trees, the quiet hum of life moving on. It's not about my name, he said simply. It's about making sure no one else goes through what I did. If even one veteran is treated with more respect tomorrow than they were yesterday, then that's enough for me. The interviewer smiled. You've become a symbol of resilience, Commander. Do you ever wish the incident never happened? He paused for a long time, gazing at the horizon. A soldier doesn't wish away his scars, he said quietly. He learns from them. That day showed me how fragile dignity can be, but it also showed me how strong a single voice can become when it refuses to stay silent. The camera lingered on his face as the wind brushed against his uniform, his medals glinting softly in the sunlight. When the interview aired, millions watched. Veterans called it the most honest moment they'd seen on television in years. Letters and emails flooded in, some from soldiers, some from ordinary citizens who said his courage had reminded them what compassion truly meant. In the months that followed, Damon began visiting schools and veteran centers across the country. He told young recruits and old soldiers alike that courage wasn't about how many battles you fought. It was about how you faced life when it fought back. One afternoon, while visiting a rehabilitation center in San Diego, a young Marine in a wheelchair rolled up to him. The Marine looked barely 20, his face pale and uncertain. "Sir," he said nervously, "I saw what you did on TV when I lost my leg last year. I thought my life was over, but then I watched your story. I wanted to say thank you." Damon smiled, placing a firm hand on the young man's shoulder. "Listen to me," he said gently. "You didn't lose your life, you started a new one. Different doesn't mean defeated. You're still here. That's what matters." The Marine nodded, tears welling in his eyes. As Damon wheeled away, Ranger trotting beside him, he felt something warm stir inside, a quiet certainty that maybe his pain had a purpose after all. Back in Bentonville, the police department was under new leadership. Chief Denton had resigned months earlier, unable to weather the political storm. The city appointed a new chief, an Army veteran named Angela Ruiz, who vowed to rebuild trust from the ground up. Her first order of business was installing a bronze plaque in the precinct lobby. It read, "In honor of Lieutenant Commander Damon Park," a reminder that respect is the highest form of duty. When Damon later saw it for himself, he didn't say anything. He just stood quietly, looking at the plaque, his reflection glimmering faintly in the polished surface. Across the country, change rippled quietly but powerfully. Officers began attending workshops about PTSD and disability. Veterans resource desks appeared inside police stations. And in some communities, police and veterans started joint community projects, something unthinkable before. His story had forced the world to look in the mirror. Despite all the progress, Damon stayed humble. He lived in a modest home near the coast, where he could watch the waves roll in each morning. He'd built a small deck out back, where he liked to drink his coffee while Ranger lay nearby. Sometimes he'd hear the faint sound of helicopters from the nearby naval base and smile. It reminded him of who he once was and how far he'd come. One morning, as he sat outside watching the sunrise, Dr. Navarro called. "Commander, you've been avoiding your follow-ups again," she said, laughing softly. "I've been busy saving the world, Doc," he teased. "You mean lecturing the world," she corrected. "But all right, I'll take it." Her tone softened. "I just wanted to tell you there's a young woman here at the VA, a nurse who said she joined after hearing about you. She said your story made her want to serve those who served. Thought you'd want to know." Damon smiled. That's the kind of metal that means something. After the call, he sat quietly for a long while, listening to the ocean breeze and the distant gulls. The world had changed, maybe only a little, but sometimes a little was enough. Later that evening, Admiral Blake called. "Commander Park," she said warmly, "the President wants to meet with you. He's presenting you with the Presidential Medal of Freedom." Damon was silent for a moment. "Ma'am, I don't think I deserve that." "You don't get to decide that," she said with a laugh. "You've earned it twice over." A month later, in the East Room of the White House, he received the medal. Cameras flashed as the president placed it gently around his neck. Reporters called it one of the most emotional ceremonies in years. As applause filled the room, Damon thought not of medals or cameras, but of the VA parking lot, the Tasers crack, and the moment everything changed. That day had nearly broken him, but it had also revealed something unshakable inside him. The power of quiet courage. After the ceremony, he stepped outside, the medal glinting against his chest. Ranger walked beside him as photographers shouted his name. But Damon didn't stop for interviews. Instead, he looked up at the American flag waving high above the White House. He saluted, not as a soldier, not as a victim, but as a man who had found peace. That night, he wrote a letter addressed to the nation. It wasn't long, just a single page, but it would later be printed in newspapers and framed in VA hospitals across the country. It read, "To every man and woman who has served, your worth does not fade with your wounds. To every citizen who has forgotten what respect means, remember. It begins with how we treat those who gave us our freedom. The fight for justice is not a battle of anger, but of honor, and that fight is never over." He signed it simply, Lieutenant Commander Damon Park, U.S. Navy, retired years later. People would still speak his name not in anger, but in gratitude. His story would be taught at police academies, discussed in classrooms, and remembered every Veterans Day as a reminder that courage isn't measured in medals or muscles. It's measured in humanity. On a quiet morning years later, the sun rose over the ocean just like it always did. Damon sat on his deck with Ranger at his side, his hands resting gently on the armrests of his chair. He watched the waves crash against the rocks, the light dancing across the water. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about the past or the pain, just the peace that comes when a man finally makes peace with the world and with himself. And somewhere between the sound of the waves and the wind, it felt like the world finally understood what he had been fighting for all along: respect, dignity, and the quiet kind of freedom that no one can ever take away.